And we're going to continue on this business of how Jehovah blesses those who walk in their integrity by considering more about neutrality. And this time we're going to see how neutrality at work might take place. You know, in Revelation chapter 2, scripture that you've read many times, the scripture reads this way: "Do not be afraid of the things you're about to suffer. Look, the devil will keep on throwing some of you into prison, that you may be fully put to the test." Well, as a result of the neutral stand that brothers took and are taking, as Brother Rockwell mentioned, some were placed in prison. And they took the consequences of that. They took the responsibilities of it, as well as the stigma, if you want to call it that the world might place on them as a result of that stand. So knowing that some of our brothers were put in prison as a result of their neutrality, there are some questions that perhaps come into your mind. What happens then? Did you ever wonder what they did, how they stayed strong spiritually, what their day-to-day routine was like? Now remember, when they go into prison, they become wards of the state. And they become a number. And all of the brothers in prison had a number. So they're given a number, just like a typewriter or a desk or any other piece of property that is owned by the state. In turn, the prison authorities are responsible for all those numbered items, just like our brothers. Now, is that different than it was in the Bible? Not really. Because in the first century, remember when Paul and Silas were in prison and they were released miraculously by the earthquake? Acts chapter 16 carries this exciting and vivid account for us. It tells us that the jailer was so worked up and excited about these men escaping, what was he going to do? Kill himself, because those prisoners had escaped. So we can see the role that Caesar plays in this responsible position. So today, when Caesar imprisons or incarcerates our brothers, he too must provide some things for them: housing, food, certain care, and in turn the prisoners have to turn their responsibilities over to Caesar. Now, have you ever wondered what it was like? Some of you here are new in the truth, and some of you perhaps know people who are in prison, but they've never talked about it much. But remember, it's happened to hundreds of our brothers. Perhaps you know some of them. Now, what we're going to do for the rest of our morning, we're going to take a look inside prison walls for a while, and we're going to see what it was really like. We're going to have living proof that you could go through an experience like that and come out spiritually strong, stable, and a servant of God. So at this time, I'd like to tell our guard, bring the prisoners in, please. See, they're a little older than they were in those years and a little slower in response. Now, we'll talk to each prisoner in turn. Guard, would you have them identify themselves, please?
Stand. Give your name, number, and place of incarceration, and remain standing.
Johnson, 10531, Milan, Michigan.
Next.
Landy Wondering, 10321, Milan, Michigan.
Next.
Blackburn, number 10594, Milan, Michigan.
Keep your voice down. Next.
Rockwell, 2215, Terre Haute, Indiana.
Next.
Highbore, 1820, from Sandstone, Minnesota, the rutabaga capital of the world.
Watch the comedy. Next.
Ross, 24487, Chillicothe, Ohio.
Next.
Poto, 22096, Chillicothe, Ohio.
Next.
Balzer, Chillicothe, Ohio, 22616.
Next.
Smith, 34299, Lewisburg Penitentiary.
Now sit down.
Now, guard, if it's all right, we'd like to speak to each prisoner directly, so would you mind just sitting for the balance of our discussion this morning, and I'd like to address each one with some questions. Thank you. Well, brothers, it's good to have you here. I know we're going to have some experiences this morning that we've never heard, and there are questions in our mind about your experiences during your prison life. It goes back a number of years. I might like to add that among these 9 men that we have seated here this morning, we have over 365 years of faithful service. Now, that's worth mentioning, wouldn't you say? 365 years. So in effect, what you brothers have done is you've paid back to Caesar what he demanded. But what about God's things? I know that was uppermost in your mind when you took your stand for the truth like you did, and you kept the neutrality issue before you. We have some questions about what theocratic activities were permitted you now during the time of your imprisonment, as well as some of your work assignments and other mundane things that happened in your 4 or 5 years, however much time you spent there. So, Brother Johnson, we're going to start with you. We'd like to ask him this question specifically, and the rest of you want to comment, you're free to do that. How were you able to study now? Different environment, totally. What happened?
Well, if we wanted to take advantage of the time, we were able to attend, we were able to have meetings. We had our book studies, we had a theocratic school, we also had a service meeting, watchtower, and even later they incorporated a public talk. And also we had time to study in the evening. We were permitted to do that.
How about the rest of you? And about similar? Now, see, you were in Milan. Was it similar with the rest of the groups? Anywhere? Brother Blackburn.
Yes, sir. Depending on the work assignment, some of the brothers were assigned on the farm. They didn't have time to study. Some of the other brothers were assigned in offices within the prison compound, and when they weren't busy with the particular department they were in, sometimes they could get from 6 to 8 hours a day in study time.
Interesting. Anyone else? Brother Poto.
Yeah, I found it interesting that at first they really didn't know how to handle us. They had already had in the prisons those who were complete pacifists, that is, some of the Amish or Quakers. I mean, total pacifists. So at first they didn't know how to handle us. And at first we were allowed only the Bible, and we did the best we could with that. But then eventually they began to allow one piece of literature and then another, and when they finally saw exactly where we fit, that we weren't total pacifists, but on the other hand, we were not going to compromise one bit, then they began to allow a relaxation of their requirements, and we were able to have many more publications, and as Brother Johnson said, to even organize meetings.
Good. That was in Chillicothe. How about up in Sandstone, Brother Highbore?
Up in Sandstone, we used to count the hours of study rather than the hours of witnessing. So we each kept a little record of our own study time, and we had a committee in the dormitory that would sort of keep track of things.
Brother Blackburn.
When we went in, they were trying for 60 hours a month as our quota for congregation publishers, so we set that as a study quota then, 60 hours a month.
So you were not deprived of study time, any of you. Is that correct, Brother Poto?
No, we even learned how to study, believe it or not, with the radio blaring. The radio was controlled from a central office, and it became pretty difficult to look up scriptures and also listen at the same time whether Ohio State made a touchdown or not as the football game went on Sunday afternoon or Saturday afternoon. But we managed to learn how to block that out completely in order to concentrate. I found that to be another thing that I never thought I would be able to do.
Brother Balzer.
And along that same line, in Chillicothe, we were all in one big dormitory. You weren't in individual cells. And so you had a bed just 2 feet away from you on each side and at the foot. And not everyone studied at the same time. So some of the fellows would get involved in a little horseplay now and then. Maybe they'd be romping around, or there were conversations going on around you. And so you learned to block all of that out and concentrate just on the thing that you were studying. And I've found that's been helpful to me ever since.
Good point. Anyone else? Similar in Terre Haute. I would like to ask you, brothers, collectively here, this was now right during World War II. I assume most of you, brother, you were a little later in the Vietnam era, but how many approximately were in prison, brothers, in Milan, for example? Do you brothers remember? Any one of you three? Brother Johnson?
I think there's about 175 witnesses in 2 dormitories.
And how about Terre Haute, Brother Rockwell?
There were about 75 or 80. They, of course, they were transient. They would come in for a little while and leave. Not like some of the others who made it a regular thing. They figured that was a good winter home for them, so they'd go out and enjoy the summer doing whatever they wanted to do.
All right, so you had sizable congregations, didn't you?
Yeah, so what we did was we were separated in several different dormitories. Sometimes there would be 4 or 5, and sometimes 20 or 30. But we had to organize individually. We had weekly meetings. It was organized, I think we'll get to this a little later, but we had a committee of 3 that arranged for the meetings, and we followed the society's suggestions and so forth. to make sure that it was organized and that we were learning. But just like we need to help the ones in the activity today, we had to help brothers to appreciate the value of study.
Good. Brother Highbore?
In Sandstone at one time we had 280 population, and we pretty well had the run of the whole place. As a matter of fact, we showed them how to operate it pretty well.
I would imagine you did.
Well, for one thing, they would, when they'd call, blow the whistle for the meal, then there were dormitories up and there were dormitories down, and they'd want everybody to come out in that little walk all the way down to the walk, and all pouring out at the same time would jam up. So we decided that we would, on the odd days, the odd number would, like A2 and A1, the odd number would go on first, and then the others would wait. And this officer, he couldn't figure out why we wouldn't come out and go to meal. And when they went, then we followed.
How about Chillicothe, one of you three brothers?
As I recall, the peak at one time got up as high as about 225.
I know you brothers have had a reunion here every once in a while, haven't you, of all those people in prison? And I remember seeing a picture. Brother Poto had dark hair at that time, by the way. And Brother Balzer had hair at the time, by the way.
Just a couple of years ago.
Yes.
Brother Balzer can tell you more about the reunion, I guess.
We had a reunion last year down in Knoxville. There were about 35 of the brothers that got together with their families. A very enjoyable weekend. We exchanged experiences. We had a special event with the circuits, similar to what you're having here. Brother Merton Campbell, who was in with us, who was also at Bethel, we went down together, and our wives, the four of us. And now they just had another reunion this past week in Knoxville. We were not able to go this time, but I understand they're going to have another one in 2 years now, so maybe the crowd will be bigger.
All right. Well, that's interesting. Now, you studied, we've gathered that. Interesting how you all did this, but now, did you have a library? You know, it's easy for us to get a Bible. We have our own library at home, one in the Kingdom Hall. How about in prison? Were publications available readily to you? Did you have to share them or what? Brother Balzer first?
Yes, we had a library, and the prison officials even furnished us with a nice bookcase, eventually, for our publications. There were certain publications that were banned, however. We were not allowed to get the Awake magazine. We could get the Watchtower, but not the Awake. And the Society, of course, had a legal booklet, and that was banned. And so we had devious little ways of getting these publications anyway. I remember the Awake magazine used to get in, and it came in and was torn in pieces and thrown into the trash, but the brother worked in the mail office. I believe that was you, wasn't it, Randall? One of us. He doesn't know where he worked, but but it would go into the trash, and a brother would pick up the trash, and then they'd take it out to the incinerator, and a brother worked at the incinerator, so the signal went along that this trash had the Awake magazine in it. And the brother out there would retrieve it, put it back together with Scotch tape, and somehow they'd get it back into the compound. Everybody knew when his turn was to read it. All you knew was that you got it from so-and-so. And that after you, another brother would get it, but you didn't know the whole list. And so we never missed an issue. We read each issue. And some of the brothers, I know in my case, my parents had the legal booklet bound in with a half a dozen other booklets into a bound book. And you were allowed to get a bound book, so in it came. We had everything we needed.
Very good. Brother Rouse.
I'd like to just have a roundtable discussion with my three colleagues here.
Just so you don't disagree on what you did now.
Well, this is a disagreement now, because the only reason is because I was later. Brother Balzer, is that right? I don't remember the brother, because he was there earlier than I was, I assume. But when I went in with the Constellations. And, of course, I didn't know they were banned. I had a whole sack full of them, and took them right straight through quarantine, took them out into the prison, out into the C dormitory where all the other brothers were. And when I unloaded those on my bed, the brother said, "Where'd you get those? How'd you get them out here? Because they're not supposed to be here. You get trouble having those." So what I did is, I didn't know what to do with them. These brothers worked at the farm. Says, "We'll take care of them for you. We'll put them out in the rafters and around the barn. People find them and read them." But then when the Awake came through, then they were eventually permitted to have those, because that was a different magazine, and we could subscribe at the time that I was there.
So it changed even during the time that you were there, no doubt. Brother Vanderwooding, how about in Milan? Was it a similar situation?
It was similar in Milan there. We could have the Watchtower, and the Awake magazine or the Constellation back there was banned, but two issues of each issue would come to the prison somehow. I never knew how they got in there, but we all got to read it. And we had the library. We had many older publications of the bound books. We had The Kingdom is at Hand, which was released, I think, in 44. And we studied that in our book study with a question booklet. And we learned all about that image. I had that image. I could explain it very well by heart. And a few years after I got out of prison, they changed the whole thing. But we had plenty of time to study. That is, I did, the job I had, and had at least 3, 4, 5 hours a day I could study or play table tennis, play basketball.
Excuse me, John, about your library. Was this library available just to the brothers, or was it open to the prison population, or what?
Just to the brothers, yes. It was in our dormitory. Each dormitory had their own library.
Brother Blackburn, let's get to some of the little things about your life there in prison. Now, one of you mentioned you had dormitories instead of cells. How was it where you stayed?
We had 2 dormitories. First, we went through a period of isolation when we were first admitted, and then we were assigned to one of the 2 dormitories. And within each of the dormitories, then you had, in effect, a congregation. I was thinking regarding the Awake magazine, they used to come in through the piggery at Milan. And we could always tell when the brothers were coming from the piggery when the wind was blowing in the right direction. And they would have the Awake magazine. Well, then it was assigned to the brother that could read the fastest in the dormitory. And he got it first. And then the brother that read the slowest would get it last. Sometimes it might take him 3 hours to read it. But in that way, all the brothers had the opportunity of reading it. I was going to mention, too, Brother Fennel, that as Brother Vanderwatering said, we had a great deal of time for personal study. We perused these older publications and books and made extensive notes in our Bibles. I always remember one brother said, there's no use wasting your time writing it in the Bible. The truth is changing too fast. When we get out, everything you're learning here will have been changed. And to some degree, he was right, but not in all cases.
Thank you. Brother Smith, your comment.
We were the first group of witnesses to go to Lewisburg Penitentiary, so we didn't have a library. But we had our meetings in a great big chapel that there were about 3,500 to 4,000 prisoners, so they had this huge chapel, and here were 25 brothers in the front having our meetings.
I might ask you now, this was in what period of time, in the 60s?
Yes, in 67 and 68.
All right, go
ahead.
They
were taking all the prisoners out of Milan and the other prisons because it was being changed to a rehabilitation center. And they said that Jehovah's Witnesses were going to be punished and not rehabilitated, so they were shipping us out to penitentiaries around the country then.
All right. Brother Rockwell, maybe we could ask you this question. Now, you were able to hold meetings. We talked about that just prior to our discussion here. In what way? Was it just like now? Did you have a service meeting, school, book study?
We had the Theocratic School. We had the service meeting. We had the Watchtower study. We had a Mormon bishop who was the warden. Obviously, he did not like Jehovah's Witnesses. And so he did everything he could to prevent our getting even what we had coming. In a good way. And then he would try to break up our individual studies in the day rooms. He said that they were interfering with other prisoners' rights. So all of us sent a letter to the director of prisons. His name was Bennett at the time. And we all mailed it the same day. And that, of course, is something that they frown on because organized activity is a very fearful thing to them. They don't like to see it. So finally the reply came, and this warden met with us. And he tried to say that what he heard back was what he was doing was right. So he said, well, if we can't study in our day room, like a little book study, then why don't you put us all in one housing unit? Just segregate us from all of the rest. And he said, no, we don't want to do that because we're using you as a good influence on the incorrigibles. So he said, well, if we're a good influence on them, you want to take away from us the only weapon we have to be good for others. And he said, well, we're just not going to abide by it. We said, fine, we're going to go right ahead with our studies, and you do what you will, and we're going to do what we will. And so we continued, but he never did, nothing was ever done about it, which indicated to us that the instructions he got from Washington where simply you let Jehovah's Witnesses do what they want to do, and don't you interfere with their study program. But for the most part, it was very enjoyable. We had I could find no fault with it. After all, where could you go? Where could you go where your laundry is done, you have to make your own bed, your food is prepared, all you have to do is go in and eat it, unless you work in the kitchen and have to do that work. Sit in an office all day and visit with a psychiatrist.
Brother Johnson, you worked in the piggery. Would you say that was enjoyable all day?
Now, that was something else, this farm detail. I thought coming into prison, I didn't relish being behind prison walls, so I selected the farm detail. But as the fall progressed and it got colder, they didn't give us any fur gloves or anything. But then we did have to work in the piggery, which was something different to me, to slaughter pigs. But so I didn't relish that too much, and as time went on, I requested a change, and then I got into the warehouse where I would have more opportunity to study. And you come in at night, after you've been out there all day, you lay on your bunk, and the first thing you know, you're asleep. And that isn't what I came into Milan for, to sleep.
I'm sure some of you will like to respond to Brother Rockwell's enjoyment of his prison stay. Any other hands? Brother Hybor.
Well, in Sandstone, you know, that's way up 60 miles from Duluth. In the winter, it gets pretty cold up there, 35 below zero and so on. We were inside. I didn't happen to land on a farm crew, but we were in the warehouse, and I had charge of all the subsistence. Now, for those of you who don't know what subsistence is, that's all food. But I had to be the liaison between the warehouse and the kitchen. But what I wanted to mention about meetings, I got permission from the warden and others, associate wardens, to keep track of the JW inmate population week by week. If some would come in, maybe a couple would go out and so on and finish their term. So I made a great charted that, the population of Jehovah's Witnesses in the prison at any given week compared to the attendance at the Universal or the General Watchtower study held in the auditorium. And there was quite a difference. Every Sunday, not all of Jehovah's Witnesses would be there. And that was quite a shock to me, and I gave some talks in the different the different dormitories on that. But there was one time when we had even a couple more at our Watchtower study, and that was when Brother McMillan visited. And that would shoot up and then right back down again.
Brother Rouse?
The detail that I was on and working when I first arrived, I spent about 8 months on it, was a carpenter detail. And, of course, one time we marched out to the gate to go out, and you're always stopped and checked by your pictures. You call off your number, and we walked out, and our officer says we're carpenter detail. There was another farm detail stood there, and they had a new man. You always tell the new man he had new clothes for 1 week. And they disappeared when they went to laundry. But anyway, he said, you're carpenter detail. And this fellow said, they're carpenters. What kind of nails they drive? Because we all stood there with 18-pound sledges on our shoulders. We're breaking concrete up out of the roads.
I'm glad you aren't that kind of a carpenter, Brother Rouse. Brother Poto, a little further on that point on the work. We got ahead of ourselves on our work assignments, but it's of interest to us. Let's go ahead with that.
What were you asking about now, the work assignment?
I forgot, because Brother Rockwell got me messed up here in my outline. We were talking about how you brothers enjoyed prison like he did. Let's get back on that.
Yeah, Brother Rockwell must have had a rough childhood.
Always.
It wasn't the downer you thought it was going to be, of course, but I never found it the least bit enjoyable because, to be perfectly serious, the areas that are allowed all the other inmates, and I found that very difficult to deal with. Being in the truth helped. And then it's also difficult. I feel that sometimes it's even maybe deliberately contrived to demean you by never using your name. You're always referred to by your number most of the time too. So I didn't find that exactly enjoyable. But our being in the truth and having our brothers and sisters there helped to overcome that, and you didn't let your mind dwell on it or depress you too long.
Thank you. We're going to go back a little bit. We don't want to miss out on our things, and we don't want to be late either. But let's get back to this business of meetings we asked about. That's where we were. We asked you about meetings. You did have a school, service meeting, and did you have a congregation book study as we do today and did then? Brother Balzer, maybe your thought.
Yes, we had all the meetings that the brothers had on the outside. Our group was divided into two congregations, and we would divide up into small groups for the Theocratic Ministry School. And so there were meetings going on all the time, and just as with anyone in the truth, these really were the lifeline for the brothers. We had to rub shoulders with hardened criminals all day and listen to horrible speech and so forth, work alongside these worldly people, and worse than most worldly people, they were the criminals. And so really the meetings constituted a spiritual lifeline for us at that time. And one of the things that I always enjoyed, we had meetings in addition to the meetings that the brothers had outside. We used to have an impromptu Theocratic Ministry School. We'd divide up into little groups. You'd go to the group that you were assigned to, and the instructor would just hand you a piece of paper with maybe one word on it, or a phrase, something from the Bible. Maybe it would be cities of refuge, for example, and you'd stand up and start talking about cities of refuge. And so it taught us to think on our feet and to have a broad knowledge of the truth. So that, I found that to be very helpful.
Thank you. Anyone else on this business of meetings? Now, you had to have a director. Things are decently and by arrangement always in Jehovah's organization. Did you have appointed school overseers? Did you do this among your own group, or was it by the society? Brother Poto.
We had tried to organize the way the congregations were. I remember that we had a committee back then, a congregation servant, assistant congregation servant, Bible study servant, that had direct access to the warden on any problems we had, and vice versa. When he wanted us to do something, someone down there mentioned how they would put some of their most incorrigible prisoners in with us because we were the majority and therefore could control them, and it had a good effect on them. So sometimes the warden would want to meet with us. So yes, brothers were appointed. At first we had our own little Theocratic Ministry schools. We broke up into what would be comparable to today a half a book study group, and we would give our student talks, and one of that number would be appointed the Theocratic Ministry School overseer, who only knew just a little bit more than the rest of us did what he was doing. But we got along somehow, and Jehovah's Spirit helped us. So for myself, I was reared with the truth, but that experience of 37 months is where I really learned what the truth was all about. So I see that now. I didn't see it then, but that was the way Jehovah had of teaching a lot of young men, if they wanted to go with it after they were released, to arrange for their lives in full-time service or to continue to serve Jehovah faithfully.
Good. Now, one question, and you've got some more comments here. We had circuit assemblies at that time. It was during the war, wasn't it? And we had district conventions. Were you ever allowed out to go to those? Brother Blackburn.
No. However, it brings up an interesting point, Brother Fennel. We would get the program arrangements, and I might mention, keeping with Brother Rockwell's comment, one of the things that prison did gave us excellent time for study, but tended to destroy your initiative in making decisions on when to do something. When you were released, it was sometimes hard then to make a decision and follow through on it. But getting back to these programs we would get from district levels when they had international conventions, we would get the program and then make up a series of talks on that program. And it was amazing how far off we were, because we didn't have the direct information from the faithful and discreet slave. And afterwards, when we looked at some of this information, it was just amazing. But Jehovah's Spirit was still with us.
Yes. It was amazing how far off you were, not how right you were, isn't it, Brother Blackburn? And that's true, because we cannot direct our own steps. Does not the Scripture say that? We need Jehovah and His organization. So you brothers stayed close to it as you could. On this matter of visits, now, you know, we're strengthened today in our congregation. Take for granted our circuit overseers visit, our district overseer at a convention. We have brothers we can call on. Were there ever brothers that came and visited you? Now, as we read the Jehovah's Witnesses of the Divine Purpose, we read Faith on the March and other books. We know that Brother McMillan, when he was alive, was very active in visiting brothers in prison during the war. Did you brothers experience that, and could you comment on it? I know you love the brother deeply. Brother Vanderwettering.
Yes, we had Brother McMillan in our institution, and really we looked forward to his visit. And he would meet there was a company servant back there, which was Brother Blackburn. and he would come into the dormitory and he'd tell us his experience on the train coming over to Milan. He said he thought he took up smoking. He smelled so bad. He said the smoke was terrible. But we always looked forward to. He was a very nice brother. He was kind and always gave a lot of encouragement to us, and we appreciated the society too, and this time sending these representatives. In other words, they didn't forget about us. Brother Covington was a lawyer at that time with the society, fought for the brothers in courts, trying to get the 4D classification, and the society was right with us all the time. And it's really a blessing to know that you have found the organization, and Jehovah God blesses you by sticking close to it.
Very good. Brother Rouse and Brother Blackburn.
Well, Brother McMillan's visit was always looked forward to by all of us because we'd have questions that we'd like to have answered from our studies. And believe me, when I say this, when I went in there, I really benefited very much from the brothers and the way they organized the studies. But when Brother McMillan would come, these questions he'd either answer for us or else he'd come back on the next visit and give us our answers. But if it's in the literature, there's times he come back and say, brothers, you can find it yourself. Look it up. And he'd make us work, too, wouldn't he, Brother Poto?
Brother Blackburn.
I was thinking one time the brothers had a great deal of time for personal study and meditation, and they brought a list one time of questions they wanted Brother McMillan to handle. And this was a full page of questions, and they were nitpicking questions and opinions and speculation. And we gave the sheet to Brother McMillan when he arrived, and he scanned it, and then he folded it up and gave it back to me and said, well, just keep the brothers busy. They're not going to be in here forever.
Brother Poto. Or Brother Rockwell first. Go ahead.
Brother McMillan always met with the Committee of Three before he talked to the brothers as a whole. And as Brother Blackburn intimated, he would want to know the general condition, what the brothers are thinking about, where their problems are. And he always had something prepared to talk about, but he always included what that group needed. And he was many of us will remember him, but he was a very fast talker, and he didn't use notes. But he had in the back of his mind an experience, a scriptural account, something that would be very personalized. And some of his talks, and we can still remember his illustrations, some of his scriptural discussions. But that was a real source of encouragement. Incidentally, Brother Sullivan took the prisons in the east, and Brother McMillan took the rest of the country. He would come in exhausted because of traveling was not easy in those days. But you never know it when he would encourage those brothers.
Appreciate those comments. Anyone else? Have you visited Chillicothe? Did he visit up in Sandstone, or who was your brother by the society, Brother Highboy?
Yes, he would visit Sandstone, and that would be the time when we'd have more than the JW population attending at that particular time. It was very, very encouraging because he would give talks and we would take notes, and it was something about that Holy Spirit that he had, being one of the anointed, that seemed to permeate everyone there, and I was especially appreciative of that. I always remember a couple of things that he always said, and that would be about sin, the presumptuous sin, and he gave a talk on that. We all have had that now. We know we presume that Jehovah's going to forgive us for this, that, and the next thing. But this was really something that everyone there looked forward to. When we heard he was coming, that was a red letter day.
Good. Well, our time is getting along. There are a lot of things we want to ask. First, let's go down the row here. Brother Johnson, now you said let's talk about your work assignment so you can see what varied experience these brothers had. You did what, did you say? Probably different during your stay, but basically what was your work assignment?
Well, actually, I finally got into the warehouse and started out as a janitor, but promoted myself up to clerk. And actually, this was an excellent assignment. I had a lot of opportunity to study. I would have to make out a few typewritten reports in the morning. The rest of my day was pretty well to myself. I go sit back there on the bags of different things, and we could really prepare for our lessons. It was actually an excellent assignment, and I appreciated that I had that opportunity.
Brother Van Ording, your job.
Well, I had 6 different assignments. I never liked working on the farm. I got off on that as quick as I could, and I went in the electrical department. They were constructing new buildings there, and it had to be wired, so I worked with Brother Roginski, who has passed away recently, and I got to be a good friend of his. But you were just tied up for those hours all the time. I wanted to get another job where I could get some time off for studying, so I thought I'd go in the cafeteria. So I went, signed there, and they put me in the dish department, dishwashing. Was that ever hot in there? I thought, boy, I made a mistake here. I should have never transferred. But then they had a night shift opening. They had industry there, which did defense work, but none of Jehovah's Witnesses worked on defense. But a lot of the other inmates did, and we had to feed them. Well, they put a night shift on, and they had to have some inmates there to feed these industry workers. So they picked 4 of us, 4 witnesses, and we had, we'd take about 2 hours each meal to feed them and wash up and so forth. We had the rest of the time to ourselves, and that was really good. And then I got the dietitian job. That was the best one. Many of the inmates, not witnesses, but the other ones were on soft diet. They had to have eggs and milk and fruit and so forth. So I had charge of that. And the only way you get a job like that is if the other individual was paroled. And that was an opening, so I quick asked Brother Porter for it. Mr. Porter, rather. And he gave it to me. And that, of course, I got on a soft diet then, too. And I kept that until there was a dormitory janitor opening in our dormitory. The brother was paroled, so I took that, and that was just, well, there was 2 of them assigned to the dormitory, and if you work real hard, you could do it in 3 hours, and you can have the rest of the day to yourself. You could go play table tennis or basketball, or you work out in the gym, or if you wanted to study all that time, you could do that too, but I went through a lot of different details, but really the dietitian and the janitorial job was the best.
You like those the best. Brother Blackburn, quickly your work assignment.
I feel like such an amateur. I only had 1 work assignment.
All right, Brother Rockwell, please.
And I worked in the record office. Brother Fennel, I might mention to you that whenever the courts were in session and were sentencing prisoners, the record office was busy. And when they weren't sentencing prisoners and we weren't releasing any, then I had a full day's time to study.
Brother Rockwell.
I started on the farm and decided that was not for me. Weeding carrots an inch high. You couldn't see the end of the row, so after about 2 weeks I took a typing test, and did the best that I could. So I got a work assignment as the psychiatric stenographer. So I worked with a psychiatrist for all the while I was in prison. But the interesting thing, when our brothers would come into quarantine, my job was to give them the test that put square holes in round circles or something. Mm-hmm. And so that gave me an opportunity to do something that is not normally allowed. I talked to every one of the brothers when they came in and alerted them to how to approach the prison life. The most enjoyable day of my prison stay was when I got a call into the office about 11 o'clock, and they said, "You're going to go home tonight."
So that was the enjoyable part. Brother Highboard.
Well, as I mentioned before, I was in the storeroom having charge of subsistence, and it was each morning I'd get requisitions slipped under the door from the kitchen, and I would fill them, put them on trucks, and take the bin cards. And my officer over me was I was the only one in this department, so he just checked them off, and I'd shoot them under the door. Not the trucks. The trucks I pushed into the door. We had to grind our own coffee. We had to do this and that, and pile all these foodstuffs on the truck. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Up there, they had a deer hunting season, and the officers, they'd pull all the farm crews off, and the officers would go around hunting deer around that area because it was wild enough. And so they'd bring it into me to store and freeze. They'd have it dressed out at the slaughterhouse and bring the venison in for me to hang in the freezer. And so one day I had a telephone up there, and the phone rang, and being cocky, I picked up the phone. I says, "It's your nickel. Start talking." And he said, This is the Warden Humphrey speaking. So that, you get a little, to know your way around a little bit in the prison. But for the most part, it was interesting because I found out one thing. The government has specifications for certain things. And if they weren't available, as they weren't during World War II, you just didn't go by those specifications. So they just threw them out the window and got what they could get.
Time is running along here, so I think what I should do is we'll get away from the work assignments for a moment. Just anything else now collectively that you brothers would like to add as to the positive things. Now, we know, as Brother Poto said, confinement is not pleasant. Jehovah created man to be free, and we appreciate freedoms, don't we? Freedom to preach, freedom to raise our families, freedom for everything. So there's no doubt there is that spirit of confinement there that just never goes away until you're released. But if you had to list a positive thing from your prison experience, you've already mentioned some. You were almost forced into a position of study, which was good. It became routine for you. You learned. But is there anything else that you'd like to add, Brother Balzer?
Well, we had opportunity to preach while we were there, and I had an officer that I worked with closely for a number of months, in fact, a couple of years, and I started a Bible study with him. He arranged for us to get into a hiding place each week where the warden and others wouldn't catch us, and the man came into the truth. And I heard later that our officer in our dormitory came into the truth. Last man in the world I ever thought would come into truth. But we did have a chance to preach, and there are some positive results from that.
Very good. Anyone else? Brother Blackburn.
Yes, Brother Fennel, I was thinking of the positive attitude. I'm glad you mentioned that. Some of our younger brothers may be viewing the future with a little fear if they think that prison might be included in their Christian course. But none of these brothers here, I'm sure, would ever give up that experience. The fellowship we had, the evidence of Jehovah's Spirit, the care the organization exercised for us, and we know that there are probably other brothers in the congregational arrangement here within the assembly that were in prison and couldn't be on the stage with us. We couldn't have all of them with us. But that positive attitude is such that it really has carried all of us through, and we utilized our time as that Jehovah provided for us, because that's really how we got it. Then we had a great blessing. It was harder on the wives that were left on the outside than it was on the brothers that went on the inside.
I would imagine. Families, and some of you were married men at the time. Brother Poto?
And just to remind the young brothers that they are not being asked to register for the draft now for nothing, and that they can keep a positive attitude as long as they are doing what they're supposed to be doing. It can be disastrous for suddenly our lives to change as they did overnight when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor and the United States was thrust into World War II. It can be disastrous then for a young man to suddenly claim he's a minister when he is an irregular publisher, inactive, or has a very low field service record and isn't even serving as a servant when he's capable of doing so. So one would have to start thinking positively about such an eventuality right now, so he can back up his claims by his past record, not one that he suddenly accumulated from the time war started up until the time he's approached for service.
Brother Hybor, one more thought.
Well, with me, I was fairly new in the truth at the time, and I would like to say that there was those 3.5 years I spent in Sandstone, I wouldn't trade for any 3.5 years I've ever had. I don't suppose Sister Hyber would agree with me on that, but the point is that we made good use of our time, and it was really upbuilding. We called it a college, and that's what it really was, by getting all the information we could get.
Shall we thank these brothers for these expressions this morning? Isaiah 49:9 says, "Say to the prisoners, go forth." So let's do that by asking our guard now to take them to lunch, and then we'll close out our program.
That's it.